episode number 21 of the Common Gear podcast, where we talk about notable auction sales from the past few weeks, highlighting the go-to digital auction platform. So predominantly Bring a Trailer and Cars and Biz, but occasionally some other outliers sneak in there if the vehicles are interesting enough. So this week we are looking at the land of the rising sun and land of potentially rising prices as it relates to some models that have historically not been out of reach for most collectors. But we flagged three sales from the last few weeks that have may indicate things on the upswing for certain models that have always been the kind of the perennial favorites for cheap and cheerful. So with that being said, as always, I'm joined by my colleague Larson Way and Jonathan Grabowski, and we will dive into the cage match of these three cars, where most of the time we agree, but occasionally we don't, and that's always a good time. So I'm going to share my screen.
It's usually the most fun when we end up not agreeing completely on things, because we get that discourse back and forth, which makes it cool and interesting.
I agree, Lars. I listened to the one we did last week, and that was probably one of my favorites so far.
Yeah, I like it. I like that. I like that energy.
So let's kick it off. This is our first one out of the gate is a 1983 Datsun 280ZX Turbo 5-speed that sold for a very impressive $25,000. Now this has always been sort of the unloved Z car. This was the 80s malaise era, fat, heavy, emotion choked, performance not as good as it was when it came out of the gate. They were just kind of throwing everything they could at these cars, turbocharging and huge displacement with no power, anything really to try to get around the fact that manufacturers were just kind of caught off guard when things really changed from the oil crisis to emissions requirements. And so turbocharging was a sort of back then was genius, right? It was a way around the fact that you couldn't just rely purely on displacement anymore. Now the Z car never really has followed that. It's always been a fairly torquey inline six, but it was more, I think the Z really just more got heavy. That's really, it kind of departed from its very lightweight original Series 1 240Z car, which these days is an incredibly valuable vehicle. Certainly not a cheap car to buy if you buy a restored one. So I think this could be a little bit of a case of a rising tide lifting some of the boats, as that relates to, if you're a Z car fanatic, you're looking at the original 240 saying, yeah, that's just out of my price range. Really the only way in now, if you're on a budget, is to buy a project, and those cars were incredibly rust prone. So if you want a project, you're going to pay like real car money for a Southwest carcass that isn't rusty. Otherwise, you're going to buy a complete car from another part of the country where it is going to need rust repair. So I think this is a case of, I want a Z car. I don't want to pay that much. I want a car I can drive, and heck, it's turbocharged, so it's going to be a little better than what I'd be getting if I was just talking about a standard naturally aspirated Z car. So, I've always liked the turbos of this era of the Z. 180 horsepower, 200 pounds of torque, foot-pounds of torque, pretty decent numbers. And these just have so many cool little details. The digital gauge cluster. I've always loved these sort of 4-blade wheels, which are unique to the turbo cars. And the other thing that's always really cool is you can actually buy, you can retrofit like the clear plexiglass covers on the headlights, so you can have ensconced headlights, which is just a cool look. And this thing just screams 80s. You got the T-tops, the big chin spoiler. I think this is strong money right now. I think you could still find one of these for less if you didn't buy on Bring a Trailer. Mileage wise, this car is fairly, it's lowish, not super low. So I wouldn't call this well bought, but I do wonder if you're going to start to see that it's not such a bad price anymore compared to what other cars start to sell for on platforms like Bring a Trailer. So I love the car. I wouldn't pay this much for one, but what do you guys think?
Go ahead, John.
This is the one I'm indifferent on these cars. You talked about malaise era, Jeff, and these kind of are like the Japanese version of the Malaysia Corvette C3s of this era. Like they don't do it for me. The only version of this from this era that does it for me is like the Paul Newman race car, which looks really cool. But I it's an okay deal. Like we don't know what the market is for these. Like there's not like a whole track record of these cars being, sold here and there. Like just looking at what was out there, there was one that was bid up to 31K on Bring a Trailer back in August of 22. There was one sold on Bring a Trailer in February for 10K. So it's a weird market. This is the really unloved Z car, unless it's I love the 240s, I love the 300s, and everything else that came afterwards. So it's a weird thing. Like you're like where it's kind of like, yeah, as you mentioned, Jeff, it's where did someone that that's been priced out of the 240 era, they don't want to go to a 300. They still kind of want that. It looks cool with like the enclosed like headlights, but it doesn't. This is the one car that I don't have a strong opinion on. It's just kind of doesn't move the needle for me. I don't, and I love Datsuns. I love the 240s. I need to own a 510 before I die. So, but this is kind of no thanks not for me.
Yeah, man. Unfortunately, I'm kind of with John on this one. There was a Jeff, if you take a left onto Coesit Ave going down Route 2, there's that Cumbies and there's a pawn shop. Before they built that storage place, I was young, dude, like 11, 12, young, like way too young. And there was I think it was a 72 240Z. So, this is probably 10 years ago at this point. And it was sitting there in that empty lot, totally rusted out. The engine was all surface rust over the whole thing. And at the time, I remember thinking well, I could buy this and try to restore it for when I get my license in 4 years. So I did kind of like these Z cars when I was a bit younger, but I did recently look into them again, probably within the last year. I had no freaking clue that a mint, early mid 70s 240Z was going for, sometimes you see them in the six figures. It's like it's just so crazy. And then I think personally, I perceive these as they kind of fall within that category of being that collectible like Z car, when in reality, I feel like this is kind of a different package. I feel like the beauty of those 240s was that it was a really lightweight, naturally aspirated, torquey motor. And for the year, the 70s, they did a lot with the technology. But this, it looks more like economy, and it doesn't really have that super, super tiny, like agile sports car look.
Yeah.
By modern standards, it's still small, but I feel like it's more of a touring car. Like if you see the seats, they're a lot more fat and plush.
Yeah.
Which is good. But then you ask yourself, well, wait a second, why did I love this car to begin with? It's not because it had big plush touring seats and, smooth suspension. It was because it was this small, nimble little race car. And you know what? Nissan has done some really innovative things, especially with the GTR line from the early 90s to, today, I guess you could say still. So they know what they're doing. 1983, almost a 3,000 cc motor with a turbo, 6 cylinders, and it's making 180 horse. Eat my ass.
Yeah.
That's not impressive. Nissan, if I talked to the engineers from 83 and I said, this is not impressive, guys, behind closed doors, I'm sure they would say, yeah, we know. It's the oil crisis. They were restricted. It's not their fault. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not Nissan's fault, but it just happened to be. I mean, the M5 came out in 85. Fucking thing had 300 horsepower from a 3.2. So it's just doesn't have the great drivetrain. And the 240Z was this, 2,600 pound little nimble sports car. They put big tires on this and big bumpers for pedestrian standards, all this crap, big seats, big steering wheel. I personally am not a fan of the 280. And that's
it's not an attractive car, Lars. It's not.
Right.
But here's the crazy thing is a lot of guys think it is.
And that's the beauty of cars is I'm not going to say they're wrong. You know what I mean?
It looks really painful from a 3/4 angle. I
don't like it personally. I personally don't like it.
Yeah. I've always felt the worst. I could get behind the body. I've always hated the taillights, but I like, the nose could be okay.
Look at
But
those
man,
bumpers, though,
that
Jeff.
But I mean, but also look at like an RX-7 from the same era. I mean, that's like such a petite, attractive looking car, and you know,
oh yeah, I don't think Datsun or Nissan was all that far removed from like what GM was doing with the Camaro and the Firebird at the same time. It was like, you know what, screw the engineering, we can just make it look this way and people will buy it, and that's all we got to do. I think it was a very similar approach. Whereas to both of your points about the RX-7, which that first generation model was hardly fuel efficient with that very oil hog rotary, and then Lars, you know, like you said, the M5 was basically a late '85 introduction, and was just like today it's still a strong performer. So it's kind of like what was going on at these companies that they couldn't figure out how to make, and Nissan in particular, you got like you hit this home run with the 240Z, hit another home run with the 510, which is basically a Japanese 2002. How do you, and to this day, I really do have the same question for Nissan, because it's like, man, you know, the 350Z over the last 10 years was a pretty great car, by all accounts.
The R32, R33.
Yeah.
I mean, they said they made 330 horse. They really made like 400 out of the box.
Yeah.
They know that's the thing, is it's not like Nissan, you suck. It's like something was up. There was some sort of regulations or rules or some sort of
But they just couldn't figure out how to get around them. Now I will say, as much as the next generation, the Z31, which we see, you know, you still see quite a few of those. Again, not all that, but it was better in some ways, and there's actually a model within that era called the Shiro Special that I've always had in my back on. Like, yeah, if I see one of those, I might make a run at it. But that's another story for another time, and it's just based purely on appearances.
Yeah.
So
just jumping back to price, like where, like the 25K, like how do you guys feel about that? Are you guys like feeling like, hey, this is a good deal? Is it?
No. It's never, if this car is done appreciating, it's not going to appreciate.
Right.
There is no room for growth in this. And the problem is, you're starting with a car that was not a very good driver's car when it was new. It's worse by today's standards, and that's kind of, I mean, that's really been holding true for all of time, right? If it is a phenomenal driver's car, it is going to hold its value. You know, it's a pretty basic rule of thumb if you're just getting into car collecting. Like, this is not going to ever be worth it. It's going to be hard for this gentleman or buyer to get this money back out of it, because there's no appreciation potential in it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, Jeff. I almost feel like something like this has to be worth. Oh, look at that little guy.
Yeah, he's coming on. He's what do you think?
Look, he's quiet.
He just 280. What do you think?
Starting him young.
Yeah, exactly.
No, show him a Porsche. That's the exposure he needs. He'll grow up and be a Porsche BMW guy.
He'll be with me tomorrow as I edit this as well. So,
well, we'll move on to, we'll show him something better than this, at least. So we'll move on to the 91 Toyota MR2 Turbo 5-speed. So this, you know, I'm actually, you know, this is $29,250. I'm actually all about this result. I've thought for years these were criminally underappreciated. I mean, mid-engine, turbocharged. It's I think a very attractive car, great looks, responds super well to just a slight, you know, bump up the wheel diameter by 2 inches, lower a little bit. It looks absolutely sick. You know, you got the crazy 90s banana yellow color, which I'm a big fan of. Super basic inside, but you had some very supportive, you know, kind of the best kind of Japanese sports seats in here. Again, you know, not super, you know, attractive, and certainly, you know, but very nicely bolstered, plenty of support, and just a, you know, entirely driver focused cabin. You know, it's a very there's nothing else to do here but drive, right? Which is what it should be all about. Now, you know, these typically are they're very easy to modify, whether you're just doing the straight turbo upgrade or there's a variety of engine swaps that are popular with with bringing in some of the JDM motors that that were meant for the MR2 but were more powerful overseas. So the fact this one remains bone stock, it's a rare color. It's got the the removable roof panels, which was not standard across the board, so that was an option. And then I think, what do we got for mileage on this car? 25,000 miles shown, which looks like they're saying is authentic, not a unknown. So I think this is a great result for the seller for sure. I mean, it's strong money, but I don't think you're gonna, unlike the 280Z, I think you're gonna see these continue to escalate. I have some thoughts I'll add in further about what the future might hold, but that's my first go with these. What do you guys think?
Lars, you want to take it?
Sure. Not necessarily huge, like I don't have a huge affinity towards these, but I've always thought they were pretty cool, and I love the fact that it has the engine in the back. Just something that makes it kind of stand out and a little bit more unique than all the other cars of this era. Also, this one, now that I'm looking at it next to the 280, it's like, yeah, this is a much better deal. I think this is a lot more, more fun and just more car in general. You get the T-top, you get the engine behind you. This one's mint with 25K, Jeff, right? I think it is 25, 24.
Very low. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very low
25K mile car.
Yeah. So it's like basically out of the box as fresh you can get it. I'll be honest with you, man. Can I say something, Jeff? You say you love the
Yeah.
style. I do think it looks good, but bro, be honest. Would you roll up in this thing? And
No.
let me say for
No.
the record, I'm not
No.
into cars because I want to be like, yo, look at my car. This thing's sick.